Welcome to this episode of Stew and the Gasholes. I think our time off from recording, we've taken a couple weeks to since in between episodes. I think I've gotten better at that. What do y'all think?
I think you should rewatch the other ones. Just
Thanks for
kidding.
the honesty. Thanks for the honesty, Joe. Appreciate that.
I didn't say anything bad. I just,
It's just not very exciting. You don't just like
yeah. I think somebody needs to punk you with a tack before you say
Yeah.
or during
it.
it.
All right. Well, our names have showed themselves. If you haven't figured that out already, I'm Stu, and these are the gas holes. So Joe and Chad are with us today, and we have our guest with us today, Nick Loris. So we're excited to talk to Nick, learn a little bit about what he's working on, and some of his thoughts on energy policy, and what how he can answer some of Joe and Chad's questions.
Hey, Nick, hey, welcome aboard.
Hey,
It's been a
thanks for
while,
having
guys.
me.
It's
I'm
good to
excited
see
to be
you.
an honorary gasshole for the next
Yeah,
45 minutes or
We'll see
so.
how you
yeah.
feel when you're done.
Yeah.
45. This is a 3 hour program.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna Rogan it up.
Yeah, we do all kinds of crazy shit on
Yeah,
here.
great.
Nick, just let's start off for the folks that don't know you and haven't seen you on all the TV shows and things you've done. Let's introduce you a little bit about yourself, your career, and kind of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, sure. So, I originally from outside of Philadelphia, about an hour north of Philly. Came down to the DC area in like
Wait a minute.
'06. What?
Pause. Where?
Where's an hour north of Philly?
Quakertown, Pennsylvania.
I grew up in Allentown.
Oh, did you really? Oh,
There was
nice.
the
Okay.
pause already. See?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My family's in like Bethlehem,
Oh,
Nazareth
mine too.
now. Yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah.
Very cool.
Funny.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but
Sorry.
Yeah, well, we should have did this at Dorney Park. That would have
Yeah,
been,
that was easy.
yeah.
Yep. Go.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
moved down to the DC area in '06 to get my master's in economics at economics. And from there, I kind of fell into a one-year fellowship that placed me at a think tank in Washington, DC, the Heritage Foundation. And I really knew nothing about energy policy. I'd probably been doing this for, almost 20 years now, still feel like I don't. But that was the position that was open. They had an energy and environment policy analyst position that was open. And I knew Heritage because I'm a big economic freedom lover, and they had the Index of Economic Freedom that they do every year. And so I was kind of familiar with Heritage, but not the think tank policy world at all, and just really came to enjoy energy and environment policy. So was there for about a dozen years, and then for the last five have been at a relatively new organization called C3 Solutions, which stands for the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions. So we are a center-right free market think tank that works on really all things energy abundance and energy innovation. We are kind of energy and technology source neutral. We still believe that conventional fuels like oil and natural gas are going to play a big role in not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy, but also embracing new forms of energy to ensure that we have affordable, reliable energy, and we're making strides towards a cleaner planet.
Very cool. That sounds like a lot of things.
It
Yeah.
is a lot of things. Yeah. Like a
Wait,
mile wide, inch deep.
you want to take the next one, buddy?
No, you're
We
talking about.
learned we learned earlier that C3 Solutions does not stand for Chad's.
Very disappointing.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Very disappointing.
there's opportunities for name changes down the line. P3 is kind of
Perfect.
nebulous. You can mean whatever you want it to mean.
So Nick,
So,
I know you and I we've been friends, colleagues for a few years now, and I know you're done a lot of research, a lot of looking into nuclear energy. So,
hmm
if we can start there, I think for us, we try to educate the folks that listen to this show, the four folks that listen to this show,
Seven now.
because five now, five folks. So we try to at least tell them about all forms of energy, educate on all forms of energy. I don't think we've had anybody talk about nuclear
Mm,
specifically, so appreciate any
very
insights you could share. What's new, what's hot, what's happening with nuclear?
Yeah, I'd say what's hot is really kind of this idea of small modular reactor technologies. And so, if you look at the U.S. nuclear fleet right now, there are all these 1,000 megawatt large reactors, large light water reactors that provide a little less than 20% of our electricity. And these are big behemoths. We just had the Vogel plant come online, the first one, new one that came online in decades. But I think what's exciting a lot of folks is the idea of some of these smaller modular reactors, different types of technologies, different sizes. I think um, one of the compelling aspects of these technologies is they can be built almost like you're building a car and shipping it to location. So instead of having to go through this like greenfield location, siting and permitting, you can essentially build them in a factory and then ship them, where
Wow.
they needed to be in different installations and sizes and capacities based on kind of the energy demand that is necessary for that given region. So there's a lot of excitement there. There's some that use spent fuel like Oklo is a newer technology. But that's just one of many. And we're finally starting to see some movement, I think, not just talking about the reactor concepts and designs, but actually financing and hopefully like building some
How do
soon.
they make that safe? Like that, I mean, that,
That was
and maybe
literally going
that's
to be my
my like
question.
layman way of looking at it. I mean, I assume still even a tiny little nuclear reactor is going to be pretty harmful if something bad happens to it, right?
Yeah, not really. And
No,
even
see, I
the
have no
ones
idea. That's
that,
why that's awesome.
yeah, I mean, even the ones that, were ostensibly harmful are really built to not be harmful. If you look
Gotcha.
at like our biggest accident in the United States, 3 Mile Island, that
Yeah.
happened in 79, there were no accidents, no deaths, or fatalities, no injuries as a result because when the reactor melts down, it essentially shuts down on itself and ensures that there is no radiation exposure at harmful limits. Looking at Chernobyl's reactor, where we did have one of the worst nuclear reactors in the world, I mean, that reactor would never, ever pass the
Gotcha.
safety and regulatory requirements that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission poses. And so some of these reactors are even safer than the safe reactors that we already have in operation today because the fuel is so secure. They have the same security and safety measurements in place. Some can be built underground, so even if there
Mhm.
is some sort of attack, it would be almost impossible for the any type of leakage or even anyone to pose a threat to that SMR technology. So these are it's something that's being obviously discussed right now because they do have to go through a very lengthy environmental review
Sure.
and safety process. And that's one thing that's arguably holding up the development of some of these SMR technologies. But in terms of you look at the risks across energy technologies, and our world in data has a lot of good statistical information on workforce fatalities and risks, but also risks to the environment that different energy technologies pose. And nuclear is among the safest, if not the safest, technologies that we have out there.
So that kind of brings me to another question. Then what's the pushback?
It's a good question. I think some of it is legacy fear. It's that, they did see Chernobyl on HBO and which kind of
50 years
dramatized.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
In
But
this country too.
yeah, yeah, not in this country, right, exactly. So I think it's really that. And then you just hear radiation, and I think that freaks a lot of people out. And the reality is, you get more radiation exposure from eating a banana or flying on an airplane than you do living next to a nuclear power plant. And there's concerns about the waste stream that these reactors produce spent fuel because they only use actually like a very small percentage of the
Right.
enriched uranium for the energy. But even if you take all of the spent fuel that we've produced in the United States over the last 50 years, that can all fit on the size of a football field about 10 yards, 10 meters deep. So it sounds like we're producing a lot, but we're not really producing that much. And countries and companies have both figured out ways to safely store this waste, to put it in geologic repositories or even to recycle the waste and use it more. So there's plenty of solutions out there. I think the real kind of the fear that is driven is tends to be not very fact based, but rather there's just this born fear out of things like radiation
Sure. Right.
and legacy Chernobyl issues.
So I know we're talking about smaller reactors, like the maybe power a town or a city or whatever. I don't know the answer to this, and I'm going to ask so because I'm going to hope that somebody that's watching is as dumb as I am. Is there a life cycle on these things? Like,
That's a good
is
question.
there a time frame? for them to burn out or
The
need to be replaced?
NRC sets timeframes based on licenses, but
Okay.
these licenses can extend for 40 years at a time and then
Okay.
be renewed for another 20 or so. And so even some reactors that have been decommissioned are perfectly operable technologies. They've either been decommissioned because the areas didn't need as much power anymore.
Gotcha.
Um, and so what we're seeing right now in several places around the US for the large light water reactor technologies that we've decommissioned. That's the quickest way that some of these data centers can get access to power. And so we're seeing some relicensing of larger nuclear power plants in the US in places like Pennsylvania at the Three Mile Island site, not the reactor that was partially melted down, but the other one next to it, as well as in Michigan too. So there's that, but then also similar to SMR technologies, they can have like very long licensing time frames where they can be operable for, good 80 years, I would
Wow.
say.
Okay.
And so the real challenge is kind of the risk reduction is that we haven't built these things before. And
Yep.
so, that's not a technological or safety risk. That is a market risk that, the venture community is a little scared to get behind these. They're excited. Amazon is financing and building their own with a company called X
No
Of
Energy.
kidding.
course they are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Amazon can do it.
Shocked.
Not everyone can do it.
Maybe I can get one on Amazon in a couple of months.
Yeah, yeah, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised.
Personal nuclear reactor.
But but yeah, these data center companies they need power and they want to
Yeah.
find and they also have a lot of them have like emissions commitments and net zero commitments and some of those are sliding because they are realizing that they need all forms of power, especially for these
Sure.
data center
That's kind of
companies.
takes us to the next question. You're right into
Yeah.
it, which is perfect. I mean, what are those potential energy demands? I mean, it's got to be insane. All the people we've talked to, it's unfathomable how much energy we actually need.
Yeah, and they vary all over the place. I mean, because demand for electricity in the U.S. has been pretty flat for the last couple of decades. And right now, I mean, I've heard anywhere from kind of like a 30x increase in demand. I've heard anywhere from like 10x to 40x. So really depends. But it's going to be a lot, and we're going to need a lot of all of these types of energy sources. I think natural gas, I think solar and battery storage, SMR technologies, relicensing these large light water reactors. I think the speed to power is kind of the thing that really the data centers want because when we were talking about this before, I think when data centers and AI was kind of first getting off the ground and no one was talking about it, we were talking about, kind of like 10 to 30 megawatt projects maybe, and now we're talking about multiple gigawatts
Right.
in given locations. It's just astronomically larger than I think anyone could have ever projected.
Wow.
I think we've talked to I mean, the few people that we have talked to about kind of this data centers and AI and all that, have made it pretty, I think it's pretty known that like we're going to need as much energy as possible. And I think that, I guess the question I have for you, do you think like from conventional sources, just, oil, gas, solar, wind, hydro, all of that, would we ever be able to produce enough electricity that way I mean, without nuclear to be able to even keep these data centers and this AI technology going?
I think it would be difficult. I probably could do it. I think it honestly, to me, it seems like the biggest constraint is regulatory and permitting. Is that if you look at
Shocking.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. If you
Oh, you
look
mean people got in the way? Oh,
yeah,
right.
people, governments,
Yeah,
bureaucracy,
government.
Yeah.
they weren't just trying to make things easier for
Yeah.
businesses. Yeah, shocker. But yeah, I mean, look, if you look at kind of the interconnection queues and where generating sources are trying to connect to the grid, I mean, we've gone from, it took about 2 years on average for a generating source to connect in the grid in the early aughts, and now we're at an average of like 5 years. And so,
Wow.
you've seen that, you've seen kind of more kind of local NIMBYism for ordinances for all of these technologies, and again, I think there's just kind of that fear of some of these newer technologies like SMRs. But then also, there's also this social license to operate the data centers in given areas too. Is that a lot of people are fearful that it's going to raise their own electricity costs, which I think is a realistic and like a
Yeah.
warranted concern for these people because data centers they do provide some jobs. There's investment, there's construction jobs, but they're not a
Once
ton of
they're
jobs.
built.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Once they're built, it doesn't take a lot of people to
Right.
maintain them. And that's not to say we shouldn't do them, but if your neighborhood is flooded with them and they're
Right.
also making a low buzzing sound or something like that, I understand why. Like they need to be built in strategic areas that are not going to be eyesores for the community. And so I'm all for aggressively expanding AI and data centers to the extent the market allows it, but it does need to be done in a way, I think, one that expedites the process so we have energy supplies to meet the demand, but then also does engage communities in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
It's really good.
With I guess like thinking about nuclear energy, is is there appeal because it's reliable? Like you mentioned solar, battery storage, wind. I mean, just curious, is that a selling point that you think folks are paying attention to, especially if the use is data centers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest like appeal for natural gas, for nuclear, even
Okay.
the like advanced geothermal that's gaining more and more attention, where we're using the same fracking technologies to pull heat out of the ground at deeper sources because clean firm is kind of like the new in vogue term for a lot of these new technologies, particularly for nuclear and advanced geothermal, is that they are emissions free, at least when generating the power and they run around the clock. And so if you look at the capacity factor of something like nuclear, it is higher than any other source, I believe. And so yeah, I think the looking at nuclear, advanced geothermal, and even hydropower, I think that is coming to kind of making a little bit of a comeback and relicensing some of our existing hydropower. But that is certainly an appeal for nuclear is the fact that it is emissions free and that it's 24/7 energy and it's one that given the new gigawatt needs of some of these data centers is that if it is built kind of in an island or kind of behind the meter whatever you want to call it off grid it's one that I don't think these data centers necessarily want to be in the business of energy but they realize that they need it and so they're kind of going to all costs to procure it and that's what you're seeing with them taking some of these risks on these newer technologies. It's Google's the one who partnered with Fervo, the advanced geothermal company, and like I said, it's Amazon who's actually they're not just signing up, power purchase agreement. They're
Right.
actually saying we actually want to finance and build these reactors too.
Well, and Microsoft's the one doing 3 Mile Island,
That's
right?
right. Yeah, 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 exactly. Because
Yeah, but
that they can get up and running fast.
Microsoft, Amazon, they don't have enough money.
Yeah, yeah.
They should spend it on something, right?
Yeah. I'm sure, listen, I'm sure I will guarantee you one thing. Amazon and Microsoft is not doing it out of the kindness of their heart. I guarantee you there's some money and benefit from them doing this.
That's right.
I
Yeah,
don't think this
a
is a
huge one. Yeah,
donation.
and they're willing to pay those high costs up front too.
Sure.
It's like, yeah, that energy is probably a lot more expensive than building, solar and battery storage for
Right.
some of them, but they want the power. And I think that hopefully the kind of benefit to us as regular consumers and even just kind of the everyday businesses that they will help de-risk these technologies and actually
Right.
start to scale them up. So when like if they're helping to finance and build the first of a kind and the fifth of a kind of these
Right.
technologies, that will hopefully create some economies of scale. We're actually like building these things a lot more efficiently than kind of what we've done in the past because I mean we've been talking about a nuclear renaissance since I first started working in energy when I mentioned kind of back in like '06. It was Republicans were really interested, and then kind of the fracking revolution, I think, really kind of undercut the economics of a lot of building these large megawatt reactors, and to the benefit of all of us and to the environment. And we got cheap natural gas, and it's been a huge boon. Cost savings for American families and businesses. We've seen reshoring of industry. I mean, I don't need to tell the Gasholes this. You probably know more about the benefits of the natural gas market
I
than
should tell
I
me
do.
I don't do very much of work, so I mean I'm learning too.
Yeah.
Do you think
But
do
yeah.
you think back in '06, even though the conversation was based around nuclear, that there was obviously, '06 is a long time ago at this point, and it was a little bit closer to the last few meltdowns. Like so public
Mhm.
opinion of nuclear was probably very low at that time, I would assume. But do you think, with these smaller reactors or these small like like we talked about for towns or developments, whatever it would be, but data center. Was the technology just not there back then to like make these compact and efficient, or is that something that's relatively new?
It's a little bit of both. The technology for some of these have been around for a long time, like molten salt reactors have been around, for gosh, I don't know, since really the Defense Department and DOE really started. It wasn't called the DOE back then, but since the federal government started working on technologies. But I think it was a matter of, and even some of the SMR technologies are just kind of smaller versions of the large light water reactor technologies,
Gotcha.
and so. I think it was more about just kind of compacting that technology and making it efficient in a way that they thought would work. So, yes, going from where we are in '06 to where we are today, it is a completely different landscape in that, people were talking about next gen nuclear technologies. I think President Bush had like a next gen program at DOE, and we were talking about the loan guarantee program at DOE to get a nuclear renaissance off the ground. But really, I think in the matter of these last 2 decades, this last decade particularly, we've seen tremendous strides in the advancements of the technologies to where they actually have been, tested and are operable. And now, we haven't really built one other than some test reactors, but other countries are actually building and deploying these now.
I'm going to give you just a hypothetical, like how long before this gets adopted in the United States? How many more years do you think that we have before we start seeing this as something that's relatively commonplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think it like the first ones will come on hopefully in the early 2030s, and like if they really
Okay.
start to take off, like we could, start to really see them like that, those economies of scale and the efficiencies that I was talking about really take place. Think that like the two things that I hesitate to say that really take off is still just the cost, is that if you do consider the fact that like natural gas is still very cheap. Solar is cheap, and even solar and storage is cheap. And given the huge capital expenditure costs of building new reactors, that still is a market barrier to entry. And then two, I think, is these policy barriers. Is like we do nuclear, I think, pretty well in the United States from the fact that we have a very safe industry. The NRC does a very good job with safety. They don't do such a great job with licensing and permitting new reactor technologies. They were supposed to create an alternative path for SMR technologies that is different than the large light water ones, and it's just been kind of a debacle, and it's been very frustrating and has not given a predictable process for the SMR companies to the fact that they're just using the old process. And so they're trying to flesh a lot of that stuff out now. But then we do like a lot of things that just makes nuclear more expensive. So like for building a nuclear power plant, whether it's a big one or a small one, we have to use quote unquote nuclear grade materials for things like the steel and the rebar and the concrete. But it's literally the same steel, rebar, and concrete that we use for building everything else. It just means it has to go through like these additional
Put a little
quality
stamp on
assurance
it.
discussions. Yeah, essentially. But it's a stamp that costs like it like increases the cost of these resources by like 50 times compared to just using it normally, even though it's the exact same quality. And so we do a lot of stupid stuff like that that just increases the cost of these reactors and makes it even more uncompetitive with, other sources of energy.
I get that, but here's my rub. When you start talking about government, right? Like my rub is like we'll spend a lot of money on bullshit,
Yeah.
right? Like I mean, and I don't mean this in a
End the
bad
podcast there.
way.
And
I'm
he's
just
done.
saying.
Yeah.
I have to end the show. But I think that we spend a lot of money on dumb stuff, and we've spent I don't know trillions or whatever the hell's beyond trillions on like clean energy and trying to shore up the environment. And we have a resource that is that correct with no carbon footprint, right? It's very like so. Why wouldn't you like say, look, let's screw it. Why don't we allocate our funds to that? It just that's what pisses me off about the government because they tell us about all these things that we need to have and then they have these technologies and things that would actually improve people's lives and would actually reach the goals and objectives. And sometimes I feel like they don't want us to. It's just easier to keep everybody separated and talking about the topics and actually having any progressiveness. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
as a general, I mean, as a normal American man, I think that that's what a lot of people
Are you
feel.
saying you're normal?
No, not me. I'm talking about you
Oh.
guys.
No, I agree. It's been very frustrating for like a number of different reasons. I think one is like people worry about like the proliferation risks of nuclear, but that's not really borne out in the data. And
Right.
then you have groups like Friends of Earth and other environmental NGOs that don't like it because of the perception that it's unsafe, when again, that's not borne out in the data.
Sure.
And then I think you just have people who have their own parochial interests who say like, oh no, we're just going to do this all with all wind and solar. And we just know that that is not feasible.
Unrealistic.
Yeah, it's just unrealistic. And, and granted, the cost of those technologies have come down where I think they can be competitive without subsidies, and that's ultimately a good thing, but it's not realistic. And
Are you
so,
gonna cover the United States in solar panels?
Cheers.
yeah, right. So I mean, yeah, so a lot of that is just very, I find the same frustrations, and we're starting to see it come around a little bit more. I think one of the challenges was like when people were coming to around it, like especially during like when cap and trade and climate change conversations were happening more on the Hill, there was a little more acceptance of nuclear from both sides of the aisle, but then Fukushima happened in Japan. And so like all of the things you kind of forgot, like, and we're beginning to like recognize nuclear to be safe, but that just derailed the conversations again. And now I think we're finally starting to like come around again, and other countries are coming around again. And we're not even the worst offenders. I mean, Germany is the one that decided to shut down all their nuclear plants, and then they ended up, burning a bunch of coal.
Germany hasn't made a good decision in about 100 years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Germans. You guys, I apologize.
Yeah.
A rough
All the
track
Germans
record back there.
listening.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I just, again, that's what just frustrates me. And I think, you kind of had mentioned in the very beginning about the bureaucracy behind most of this stuff. And it's like, I just want people to do things what's best for the people that are living now. And we spend a lot of time chasing our tail on some fictitious their dreams or some types of goals and objectives that just are not realistic. And then you have technologies over here. Now, Chad and myself are primarily in the natural gas business. I mean, that is what we've done for 20 years ish now. But I will sit and tell you, just like he will and anybody else, is that like I want the most efficient, best, cleanest fuel source for my family, the most reliable, and that if nuclear could do that, I think that we have a duty to really look into that, not just for us now, but for future generations. If it does kill a lot of birds with one stone.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I mean, I like to think the same is true with natural gas, not to be
Agreed.
a defender of natural gas, but if you look at the cost savings for American families, and particularly for low income families who spend a higher percentage of their budget on energy costs, I
Yep.
mean, what the fracking revolution in natural gas has done for not just the economy, but also the environment. I mean, there's been studies that have shown the
Yeah.
reduction in particulate matter
Yep.
from coal switching to natural gas, as well as the emissions reduction. It's by far the largest reason that we are the global leader in CO2 emissions reductions, but it also helped reduce like the smog and the air quality issues we've
Yep.
had in some parts of the country too. And so if we can further extend that with other clean energy sources like nuclear, like energy affordability and reliability, I think are my first priorities, and then we
Yep.
can continue to make progress on environmental well-being through these technologies.
Well, for up until a decade ago, natural gas was a clean, green
Right.
fuel.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the
And yeah,
transition fuel to make us a cleaner
that's
America.
like, yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, that's like, again, like I keep dating myself. When I first started working on this issue, everyone called natural gas the bridge fuel. And it was like
Yeah.
from like coal to renewables. And that, like, then the fracking revolution happened, and it extended that bridge fuel was like instead of a footbridge, it was like the Golden, Gate Bridge. And then they were not cool with it. And like all of a
Yeah.
sudden, people just started having beyond natural gas campaigns, not to name any environmental think tanks that,
No, we name no names.
yeah.
I probably will because I work.
Yeah, I already
Not
have.
great at
I
that.
think I think one of the things that kind of bugs me a little bit is like, you talked about safety for nuclear and even natural gas. Like let's toss natural gas in there too because it's relatively a safe energy source for the most
Sure.
part. Um, I'd like to know, and I'm sure somebody has some damn study out there somewhere, but how many people get killed by electricity every year? Like, just saying. Nobody cares about that because it's already here. Right? They only
Hmm.
care about the stuff that may potentially happen down the like that's what I get confused about. Like we don't
Yeah.
look into the safer technology because it may not be as safe as the shitty one that we have now.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And this kind of like precautionary principle approach
Yeah.
dominates. And then, yeah, we're left without like actually taking risks and investments and pursuing, good
Yeah.
alternatives.
It's like I know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy, and he
Yeah,
told
right.
me. Right?
Exactly.
Like it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways, go
Yeah,
ahead,
Uh,
Stu,
Stu.
you
Back
you
on.
can have the next questions too.
Me?
I'm gonna drink
Yeah, that's
some.
you. You can talk again.
What's in that cup? No.
Just water.
Oh, okay. All right. Just making sure. Just making sure. No, I mean, I'll just say to your point, Joe, I mean, I think it's a good one, which is rare, so congratulations. But I mean, that's it. I mean, nobody wants to weigh the pros and cons of energy, right? I mean, safety is one thing, but like waste, like I mean, everything has waste, everything has risk, and so just put everything on the table and weigh it equally, which kind of leads into my next question. See what I did there. So Nick, you mentioned some of your earlier jobs, earlier places of work, and there definitely was more of a free market kind of dynamic
Mhm.
philosophy, whatever you want to call it, at those places. And so, yeah, I mean, if you weigh it all equal, which means no tax incentives for anything, that's kind of what I would think would be valuable. But just curious, if you take away tax incentives, if you take away some of this other stuff, like what role do you see the government playing when it comes to our energy markets?
Yeah, well, a good question. And, even going back to your earlier part, like one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Sowell is there's no solutions, just trade-offs. And that's definitely true with energy sources too. We need to weigh all the trade-offs, not just the environmental trade-offs, but the economic ones too. And I think with respect to energy subsidies, yeah, my, kind of like libertarian dream is to get rid of all energy subsidies, and that really starts with the tax credits, particularly for mature technologies, because I was just looking at a study that the Brookings Institute did for an op-ed that I was writing, and they surveyed kind of what were the biggest causations of wind and solar cancellations. I think the years from like 2016 to 2022 or 2023. And by far, the leading causes were kind of local ordinances, so kind of government regulations at the state and local level that rose out of some NIMBYism, and then community concerns, which resulted in litigation. And the last eighth out of eight was financing concerns. And so I think we are at a cost when wind and solar are competitive without these subsidies. And we've seen a lot of investments in battery technologies and battery manufacturing that was made before the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I do think that these technologies can be cost competitive without subsidies. I think there is a role for the government to play, in basic and applied research, in ensuring that, polluters, pay. If there is some sort of accident or there are some harmful emissions, that we figure out what the best way to reduce them in a sensible cost benefit analysis ratio. I don't think we're ever going to reduce emissions down to zero, nor should we, because we have clean air and clean water in the United States, and a lot of the times when we're tightening these regulations, they come with increasingly high compliance costs and diminishing marginal returns from an environmental perspective, almost down to zero. Where for a lot of kind of the criterion pollution levels, we're already at background levels, like natural background levels, because you have the emissions just kind of from the earth. So that's kind of the way I approach it. Is like a lot of our environmental regulations should be kind of more site and situation specific. And then if you do have a role for the government in terms of energy innovation, I'd much rather see them get out of the business of financing these projects through tax credits that largely result in a wealth transfer, I think, from taxpayers to private equity and big banks, is that we have them take risks on some of these more innovative technologies. And if those are the ones that can't secure funding in the private sector, then like maybe we take the risks there. And if they don't work out, then we pull the plug.
Yeah. Do you see, I guess, like from like a, you know, like consumer standpoint, right? I mean, there is potential. I mean, I guess I don't see it this way, but like you think about LNG exports, I mean, there is potential for all of our product to be shipped overseas, which could drive up the price of domestic natural gas. You
Hmm.
see maybe with electricity, right? If all this nuclear power goes to the data centers, that drives up the consumer price for electricity, the residential consumer price. So, I mean, is there a role for government in kind of like being the consumer advocate?
Yeah. If they were the actual advocate for the consumer, then maybe.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes that results in bad policy where it's either subsidies, regulations, or price floors, or even just like anti like gouging legislation, which I think doesn't allow the markets to work. I mean, we've seen this. I've worked on both kind of the crude oil export ban fight and also LNG exports, and I'm a big proponent of open competitive markets and trade, and I think that's allowed American businesses to export their natural gas, which lowers the price of energy in those countries. So when they export stuff to us, it should ostensibly cheaper because energy is an input. So it goes into making their products even cheaper for Americans to buy. And if it does increase prices in the United States, it incents more production here too. So I think it just there's so many market dynamics at work that I trust the markets and price signals to figure those things out more than I do politicians and bureaucrats. And I just think it's a very slippery slope that, when there was, hopefully this doesn't offend any of your listeners, but if for anyone who kind of was
Where
working for like the American Chemistry Council or some of those groups were fighting LNG exports, but they wanted to uh, be able to export their own products, it was perfectly fine there. And so it's like, I don't know, it just gets into very slippery conversations when you say, okay, we don't want to export this because it's going to hurt our prices, but we want to be able to export our product.
Well, what is the pushback on exportation?
That'll hurt domestic consumers. That like, but again, I think it's like we have a saturated market here too, and it's like the product's got to go somewhere, and if there's a higher market incentive and a better price signal to catch overseas, like we should be able to do that. I just think that
Oh,
like some
well,
people get a little too narrow-minded in their thinking about kind of economics that if we export it, it's going to increase prices domestically, and that will hurt the businesses who use natural gas as a feedstock, or it's going to hurt American ratepayers. And
I mean, it's also like you got to have the pipelines, right? I mean,
for
don't
sure,
don't
yeah,
blame LNG exports for the price of natural gas going up.
Yeah.
But there's no pipelines to get it from West Texas to where everybody lives on the East
but this
Coast.
is the convoluted bullshit. This
yeah,
is the stuff that
yeah,
doesn't
it
make
is,
sense
yeah,
to
yeah,
me.
yeah. Welcome to DC.
Yeah,
Well, no, I
exactly.
get that, but like this from a political standpoint, I don't mean to backtrack here, but like, can somebody like kind of tune in on what's the most important variable? Like, is it sustainability, reliability, environmental, cost, safety,
No,
like scalable?
everybody picks a bunch of them.
That's the problem. Is that
Yeah,
we're not focused on one common goal. There's everybody's got a different position. It's just pure chaos.
right. Yeah,
That's why nothing ever gets happens.
totally. And the crude oil export ban was the same thing. Everyone thought we shouldn't export our own crude. We should use it here at home and keep prices low. But we were getting so much of the light sweet crude, and our refineries have the heavier sour. They're built to handle the heavier sour from places like Canada, and it was actually going to create more efficiency in the market and increase supplies. But it's just, I think I think people have enough of an economics understanding to be kind of ignorant and dangerous when it comes to some of this stuff, and that comes, that results in bad policy.
I mean, but there's people like you guys, right? That are like down there doing doing the hard work of like kind of pounding the pavement, talking to these representatives, trying to get policy changed or whatever like that. I, I, I get a little frustrated with our when we have congressmen or representatives or senators or whatever that just don't know their ass from their elbow when it comes to this that are up there making decisions. Like I don't in anything in life, whether it's running a business or whatever, you want the person that's the highest, the best, the most experience to start talking about and making these decisions. And then we hire bunch of knuckleheads, not hire, we vote for a bunch of knuckleheads that go in there and they don't even know. Like I've talked to some of these people and it's like, I don't know anything about that. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
it's like how
Yeah,
can you not? You just voted on it. Like,
right. Yeah. And
it's
just
like,
like,
well,
again, the Biden administration's LNG export policy was just based in like, apparently like protecting the consumer and protecting the environment. But the fact that like, again, like we just discussed, like the economics of the LNG exports, but also like it was going to replace like dirtier Russian fuel. And, our allies in Europe are like, hey, Russia's not good. They're frigging
right.
invading
Yeah.
Ukraine. Like maybe
And
we need some help
we
to
need
get
some
Resend us
help.
energy
something.
security. And we're like, nah, we're just gonna like
Now we're
hold
cool.
off for a little bit. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'll say this too, though. I mean, part of the challenge is nobody wants nobody wants nuance, right? So all these people that are
Yeah.
voting, I'm not saying there's not knuckleheads there, but at the same time, like voters they don't want to hear nuance, which is a sad state of our culture, but that's the reality. Like they pick their thing, right? So you got a group that picks the environment's number one.
Yep.
You got a group that picks
Well, that's where
reliability's
it all
number
goes
one.
downhill.
Well,
Hmm.
and that's like it's yes, it's
Same thing with
environment, it's
everything.
reliability, it's affordability. Like, why can't we just have all of them, kind of push
Can't
all of them
we be
forward?
friends?
Because then we wouldn't have anything to argue about.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true.
And if we didn't
That.
have anything to argue about, we'd have nobody to vote for. I mean, you guys have been on here long enough with me. Like the government irritates me, and it's not because of the government. Like I'm not gonna go crazy or nothing, but like I just I think that the founding fathers put in a really good, I think, plan. I think it was great, but we've gotten really far away from it, I feel like, and it bums me out that there's folks like you guys out there. Like Nick, you've been doing this since, what'd you say, '06?
Yeah, pretty much.
So, your whole life has been this. So you've built a career and a lifestyle out of this, and I think you're probably 10 times smarter than most of the people that are up there voting on this
Yeah,
stuff. And
that's the
that's what
crazy part.
bugs me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
you're
you
banging
know,
your head against the wall to try to get some
yeah,
small
that's
change.
why I don't know how you guys do it. Like
Yeah, I
Stu
don't either.
jokingly said I
Like,
should be
yeah.
like I should be in politics, and I was like, "Are you crazy?
Yeah.
I couldn't do what you guys do. The amount of like,
Yeah,
anyway.
I get
Fine. I
it.
know. They know.
Anyways, I appreciate the conversation. I did want to have a question about I did have a question that's kind of not part of this, but
Oh, sure.
um
That's good.
well, you've been doing this kind of, it's been similar, right? The same job, I assume, working through
Yeah,
different companies and things like.
yeah.
But do you ever aspire to move into the political arena at any point? Like, do you have any desire to do that?
No, I don't. I don't think I could be a politician because I do think you get like one. I think it just like it requires like a level of like hubris and like arrogance that I just like.
Oh, I got that.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the other
yeah.
part I got down.
Yeah. But I think like you end up I feel like making bad deals and it's very hard to like vote like with your like
People.
yeah, right, exactly. And so no, I think like something at like the Department of Energy or something like that, I think would be interesting. Like I do think like our national labs are really cool. They make and do a lot of cool stuff. Like even just like the technologies we've gotten from like the Department of Defense is like it is like how we got the internet and how we got GPS. And that was because like we wanted to learn how to like, bomb people better and it turned into like something awesome for like all,
Yeah.
For
so like
everybody.
I
yeah.
can email you right after this because we wanted to bomb some people.
Yeah, really. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
You're like, there
America.
you go. Yeah, I could like find like the closest Chick-fil-A because of that. So I do think that there is like a good role there, and I think the Department of Energy and their like labs do some cool stuff. But like, I would never want to run for political office. That doesn't interest me.
Nick, I mean, I asked Stuart this before, but I'll ask you, since the administration change, have you seen any major changes in your world?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the biggest one is just kind of just like there is been like a strong attempt, obviously, to like rationalize the size of government, which I think was very well intentioned. I think like it probably honestly like wasn't carried out the most effectively.
That's Trump for you. He's got good
Yeah, yeah,
ideas.
yeah,
He just
yeah.
doesn't know how to do
Right. So
And
like
Trump and
Like
bust
you,
at that
Joe.
point.
yeah. And as someone who is more of a free trader, I found like the conversations and the implementations of tariffs like troubling from coming of a consumer standpoint and like also kind of counter to his energy dominance and wanting to like reshore manufacturing
Yeah.
because a lot of our manufacturers import the stuff he's implementing tariffs on. So
We do.
those have been some big changes. Honestly, I think the biggest change, and Stu probably gets this too, is just like the pace with which he moves. It is like lightning fast, and that's kind of encouraging in some senses because you want a government who like wants to like
Sure.
get stuff done, but it's also like
You might want them to stop and think for a second.
yeah, right, yeah, and, like think about like yeah the like unintended consequences of some of these policies or regulations or actions, and so I do love kind of the Energy Dominance Council and the ideas there of energy affordability and reliability. And, I like Chris Wright a lot at DOE. I think he's brings a lot of private sector savvy to that job because he worked for Liberty Energy and, and he's got like super extensive knowledge as an engineer, and so he's got like a very brainy scientist and someone who can talk about like the levelized cost of energy, but then also is invested in companies like Oklo and Fervo geothermal. So it's like it's cool to have someone like an energy nerd at DOE rather than a politician like it's usually been.
Sure.
So there's like a lot of exciting things to work on, and I'm hoping like some of the regulatory reform and
That's
opportunities
what I was going to ask you
reforms.
about.
Like, I think that that is like the most ripe. Some good like unilateral action. I'd like to see Congress like step up because I think we would actually need to like codify some of these
Yeah,
changes.
yeah,
And, like if because it just swings with one administration to the next, and I don't think that's
right.
particularly helpful for businesses or economic certainty. And as much progress as they could make on permitting reform, I think it's only going to go so far unless Congress actually steps up and gets a good permitting refill
Agreed. I
bill.
just didn't know where kind of, I know that that was a big thing going in is doing
Yeah.
funding reform was a big topic. I
Yeah, and
just didn't know if there's any
they're
movement.
doing a good, like I think a lot of good work on kind of NEPA reform unilaterally, the National Environmental Policy Act. But the big permitting build stalled in the Senate right before the change in administrations, and so just I think given reconciliation and everything going on, it just like it's kind of been put on the back burner for now, and I'm hoping Congress will kind of step it up again and ideally do it before the midterm elections. But
Cool.
that's optimistic, probably.
Stewie, what do you
I think we are about that time to wrap it up, huh?
got? Somebody pokes Stu with a pen
Who's
again.
got to read the diplomas behind him?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Stu, are
Yeah.
those yours?
Yeah.
These are not mine. I borrowed somebody's
Got those
office
on
for this talk.
Amazon.
You're like Frank Abernathy from Catch Me If You Can. You're gonna be
Yeah,
like
exactly.
playing
Yeah.
soon.
No, those are like the ones you go when you get from the store that have the fake
Yeah.
diploma in them.
Yeah.
That's how the picture on his desk of his
Yes.
family is too.
Just
Hung it up.
framed, yeah.
Yeah. That's easy. He's been telling me about all these years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
always the picture.
Yeah.
Well, that's the reality is I'm about to get kicked out of this office since I'm borrowing it. So I guess we should wrap it
Wrap
up.
it up.
All right,
Nick,
buddy.
it was awesome having you.
Yeah,
That's
thanks. Happy to
you
come
need
back
stuff.
anytime. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Nick.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it, dude. And if I ever get down to DC anytime soon, we'll
We're
have to
trying
definitely
Yeah.
to.
do
Maybe in
something.
Grab a
July.
beer. Yeah, for sure. It'll be fun.
Don't hang up. I'll hit stop, but don't hang up.
Okay. I'm staying.
Noodles.
See ya.